Let's cultivate our motivation. So remember a time when you were very upset because somebody mistreated you or broke trust or was aggressive. So recall the kinds of emotions that you felt after that situation. So try to give names to those emotions. So usually those kinds of emotions are quite painful. They seem to be very real and completely valid given the situation and the other person's behavior. So given that, what happens if you just kind of ask yourself, am I willing to give up those emotions? In order to have a peaceful mind? Am I willing to set those aside? Or does setting them aside seem too much to ask at this moment? Or even threatening to make us defenseless or whatever if we give them up? And then imagine what it might feel like. Just do an imagination thing now of what it might feel like if you were able to put those emotions aside. Not stuff them down, but just let them go. Imagine how would you feel deep in your heart if you were able to do that? And then think that all other living beings have similarly very deeply felt painful emotions. The reasons for them may not be the same as the reasons for yours, but they still feel those same feelings. And wish all those other living beings to be free of those painful emotions. And imagine them being free. And then make your motivation for your life to, as much as possible, contribute to the well-being of others, to be concerned with their feelings, their needs, regardless of whether they like you or whether you like them. But just imagine, on the basis of us all being living beings who want happiness and not suffering, that you can have that kind of open heart towards everybody. So let me answer these questions first, or attempt to answer the questions. I've learned that I should never expect anybody to be satisfied with the answers I give to questions. Okay, so somebody asks, I wonder if there is any release for the person who is able to apologize, but the forgiveness is not given by the other party. Does that go towards purifying the karma of the one apologizing? When we apologize, that indicates a shift in our own mind. Whoever we harmed before, we now have a new attitude towards them. Yeah, and we regret what we did before, we acknowledge what happened, we have a new attitude, we wish to abandon that kind of behavior in the future. Now, sometimes when we want to apologize to somebody, that person is alive, we can go and talk to them. Sometimes they're alive, but the rift was quite big, and we're not sure if they're ready to talk to us or not. Yeah, so we may have to send out a little reminder, a little note, or we might have to make the apology in a letter or something like that. And sometimes it may happen that the person has already died, so there's no opportunity to go to them directly and apologize. The real benefit of apologizing is what's happening inside here, the change in our own mind. Yeah, because we can't control whether we'll be able to see the other person or not. And sometimes we may apologize, and like this person asked, the other person refuses the apology. They say, I was hurt too much. This was too devastating for me. I don't want to see you. I don't want to have any contact with you. Okay? That doesn't diminish the power of the change in attitude in our own mind. Okay? So in terms of karma, when we're able to change our attitude like that, you've done the 4 opponent powers for purification. And so you've purified, we always do the 4 opponent powers many, many times, but you're working at purifying that. And so karmically, you accumulate a lot of benefit from doing that, whether the other person is alive or not, whether they accept the apology or not. Okay? So the thing is, when we give an apology, if we want the other person to be happy, we really hope that for their sake, they will accept the apology, because we know that if they accept the apology in their hearts, they will feel calmer, and they'll be able to set this down and understand the situation. So we're not hoping that other people accept our apology so that we will feel, I don't know what the word is, so that we will feel like we did our duty or whatever. Yeah, validated or whatever. Yeah, because the real way to change whatever we felt is by us dealing with our own mind. Of course, it's nice if the other person accepts an apology. It's much nicer. But if they can't, that doesn't mean that we're still at fault or something like that. It simply means that the other person is stuck in some way. Yeah, their mind is tight. They're not ready to see the situation in another way. And so to have some compassion for them, yeah, because they're suffering in their inability to change their attitude towards us. Okay. And the second question is, what can you do when you receive pressure from your family to forgive a person that you are not ready to forgive, especially when the person pushing you is your mother, so she can feel better? Well, maybe you stamp your feet and you shake your hands and you say, Mom, mind your own business, get off my back. Because that's probably what you feel like doing. But then the thing is, then you have anger at the initial person, and now you're angry at your mom too. Yeah. So that's not very helpful. You know, who wants to have double the amount of anger? So it's kind of a thing of, especially with our parents, learning to accept them. You know, this is how they are. Maybe your mom wants you to forgive so she can feel better. Can you crawl inside your mom's mind and push some buttons and make her not think like that? No. If you yell and cry, will she change how she thinks? She'll only get madder and push you more. You know? So with people, very often, our only recourse is to accept them the way they are. Even though we see they have so much potential to be somebody else, and we have so much good advice to give them on how they should change and do things differently, sometimes the only thing we can do is just to say, that's the way they are, and I'm going to love them for what they are. And that's it. And then, you know, apologize or forgive the other person when you feel ready to do it. Okay. I've noticed somehow when I talk about, sometimes I talk about a book I want to write called The Things My Mother Taught Me, you know, and how she said certain things, or at least how I understood them at a certain point in my life, was not so good. But when I really looked at what she was asking, sometimes she was asking me Dharma questions. But I didn't see them as Dharma questions until I met the Dharma. And I started to look at life through the viewpoint of the Buddhist perspective, whereby we are responsible for our own thoughts and our own feelings. And we are the only person that we can change, and that we have the power to do it. Okay, so as an example, you know, my mother, whenever I would do certain things, she would say, "Young lady, who do you think you are?" Anybody else hear those words? Yeah. So they were said in a certain way. I took them. Oh, I'm getting criticized. I'm getting ostracized. She doesn't understand me, you know, blah, 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 blah. But when I became a Buddhist and I decided, okay, let's drop all that stuff. And somebody's saying, who do you think you are? Well, that's exactly the question that the Buddha asked when he taught selflessness. Yeah, that's the question Tsongkhapa and Nagarjuna are asking when they teach us, you know, the 7-point meditation for disproving the object in negation. And I thought, you know, actually, who do I think I am? That's something that I need to explore. It's a good question. Who do I think I am? Because who I think I am influences how I behave and how I think and how I interpret other people's actions. So this one, if I can say it from another perspective, I don't know whether the person who asked the question is ready to do this, but just giving you a viewpoint of how I might do it, is, my mom's pushing me to forgive somebody, and she said, "Why can't you forgive? You're just holding on to your anger and making yourself and everybody else around you miserable. Forgive her already." Okay, so that's how it might be said. Remember, my mother's side of the family. Dad's side of the family was different. Okay, so somebody takes that. You hear that. Okay, so there's one way to take it, which we all know how to take it. You're hurt and you're upset and they don't understand it. But then if I just stop and say, she said, "Why can't you forgive that person?" Well, that's actually a good question. What is it that is blocking me from forgiving? Because if I can find out what it is in myself that is blocking me from forgiving, then maybe I can chip away at that and become receptive to forgiving. So actually, it's a good question. And when she said, "You're making yourself miserable and everybody else in the family miserable," actually, she's right. If I'm holding on to rancor, I'm making myself miserable, and I'm throwing my misery and my, anger up, whenever there's a family dinner, my mood vibrates through the air or whatever. So, actually, when I think about it, if I disregard her tone of voice and don't pay any attention to possible motivations, but just look at what she said, there's some good questions there for me to think about. Okay? What do you think? Yeah? You think? Yeah, they are good questions. So the trick is, to disregard the tone of voice, the volume of the voice, the number of times they repeat it. And just pay attention to the words and see if there's something useful in it. There may be not, but if there's something useful, why not use it? Okay. Now, somebody might say, "You're just making fun of people who have problems and telling them just to brush it off and disregard it. And, the way you're responding, people don't feel like they're heard or understood." Okay, some people may feel that way. It's a free world. You can feel however you want. Okay, but personally speaking, I find it very helpful when I work with my own problems to see things like that. Yeah, I find it very helpful when working with my own stubborn mind to kind of, sometimes I make fun of it. Yeah, or I ridicule my own stubborn mind. Now, you might think, "Oh, that's terrible. You're just blaming yourself." No, I'm not blaming myself. I'm looking at what the self-centered mind does and making fun of the self-centered mind. Because the self-centered mind is not my friend. Okay, if you've practiced Dharma for any period of time, this point is really emphasized a lot, that our self-centered mind it pretends to be our friend, but it actually isn't. Yeah. So when I do this, I'm kind of, needling my own self-centeredness. I'm going back to that question my mom said of who do you think you are? Because sometimes I think I am the person most entitled to happiness in this world, and the world is not giving me the happiness I deserve. And when I have that kind of idea in my mind, I find it very good to tease myself about it. Yeah. Instead of taking myself so seriously. Okay, so in my Dharma practice, I'm not talking about yours, in my Dharma practice, humor is very important. Yeah, because if I can't laugh at myself, then I'm just going to cry. And I've already used enough of packages of tissues in my life. It's time to kind of swear off the tissues. Okay? So I realize I may be presenting things that in a way that other people find rather strange. But when you come to Buddha Dharma, you have to be willing to question yourself and question your emotions, question your interpretations of things, question who you think you are, question what you think is good for you. Yeah, because the Buddha's teachings, they aren't for reinforcing what we already believe, because what we already believe is making us miserable. So it's going to challenge what we believe. And initially, challenging what we believe is highly uncomfortable. But after a while, you begin to see the benefit in it. Before I do the third question here, let me give you an example of how we get challenged when we get into Buddhist practice. So I want to read you a verse from a text called The 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas. I did a commentary on it called Don't Believe Everything You Think. Okay, here it is. Okay, so it's verse 16 of the 37 practices. Even if a person for whom you've cared, like your own child, regards you as an enemy. So think of somebody that you have cared for like your own child. And the way a parent feels about their child, that's something quite special. The care and compassion a parent has towards their child. So even if a person for whom you've cared like your own child regards you as an enemy, so somebody you care about, who you've helped a lot, turns on you and sees you as an enemy. What advice do we get? Cherish him specially, like a mother does her child who is stricken by sickness. What? This person who betrayed my trust, who hurt me so bad, I'm supposed to cherish them like a mother cherishes her child who is stricken by sickness. I mean, a mother when her kid is sick and delirious, is a mother mad at the child? Does the mother feel hurt? Does she feel like the child is ungrateful and has betrayed her trust? No, she doesn't, because she knows that the child is sick, and especially if the child has a fever and is somewhat delirious, yeah, she knows that the child is not thinking straight. Yeah, that the kid is just reacting to the illness, and that if the kid were healthy and calm, they would not be acting that way towards her. So the mother understands all of this. And so she has compassion for that person, like she would for her child, that person who she's cared for and trusted, who now regards her as an enemy. Okay? So because of her whole understanding, a big understanding of this situation, she doesn't take what the baby is doing personally as a comment on her. She sees that what the baby is doing, the child is doing, is expressing their own suffering. So in the same way, when other people harm us, if we can see, why are they harming us? I don't think that people harm us because they're happy. Yeah, that they wake up in the morning and it's a beautiful summer day in Washington State. I think I will go out and hurt somebody's feelings, or I think I will go out and beat them up. People don't hurt others because they're happy. People hurt others because they're unhappy. Yeah. Why is that person who's betraying our trust and so on unhappy? Their self-grasping ignorance is operating. Their self-centered thought is operating. Yeah. They can't think clearly from a Dharma perspective. They're falling back into the old habitual worldly ways of seeing things. And so they're totally confused and totally miserable and think that by doing what they're doing, they will be happy. When in fact, what they're doing, they've harmed me, but they don't feel any better after it. Yeah. So instead of being angry at a person who's suffering, have some compassion for that person. So but you can see the way the verse is written, and all the verses in this text are written in that way. They give you a situation which we're very familiar with, and we know our habitual way of responding to it. And then Tokme Zampo, the author of this text, gives us a completely different way to respond to it. And our self-centered mind, our ego mind goes, what? What? You expect when somebody betrays my trust, I'm going to see them with the same kind of love that a mother has for her sick child? Forget it. Yeah, so we scream back at the text that we're reading. Yeah. But after you've heard enough teachings, the teachers keep saying the same thing. Our afflictions are not seeing reality. Our mental afflictions, like resentment and jealousy and spite and anger and greed and so forth. These things are not seeing the situation accurately. Yeah? Don't believe them. That's why the book is titled Don't Believe Everything You Think, because sometimes what we think is crazy, even though we think that we're sane people and society says we're sane. But that's because there's a lot of craziness in this world. We don't even, look at the media situation now. People don't know what to believe and who's telling the truth. Yeah? Anyway, I won't go into that topic. Yeah. But to see, okay, that person is suffering due to their own afflictions. Yeah. I need to have compassion for them, not anger. Yeah. If I have anger, then I'm exactly like this person's mom saying, you have so many afflictions, just get over it. Which, of course, is not going to help anybody at all. Okay? So that's why, we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to question some of our old habits, some of our emotional patterns, some of the ways that we interpret things? Yeah. Are we willing to question that? And sometimes it takes us some time until our mind is willing to question. So slowly, yeah. One of my teachers, one of the things he said to us a lot is slowly, slowly, dear. Yeah, he called everybody dear, slowly, slowly, dear. Good enough, dear. You do what you can, and give yourself credit for what you can do. And at the same time, know that you can get better in the future. Okay, next question. I did not really hear you address the incredible emotional pain that is involved when one has been a victim of someone's abuse or breaking of trust, and so forth. These emotions are valid, they are real, and often devastating. True or not true? True. She speaks with levity and humor about how we hold on to grudges. But when we are deeply hurt by truly egregious actions, it rarely seems funny, even in retrospect. What does one do with these profound emotions and wounds? They can plague us for a very long time and close us down. In order to forgive, what does one do with these emotions? Okay, everybody understanding what this person is asking? It's a good question. Okay. Now, I would respond to this question in very different ways, depending on who the person was who was asking it. I don't have one pat answer for how to respond to this. Okay, so I'll give you both answers, and you'll probably not like one of them. Okay, if it were somebody whose emotion, who feels their emotions very deeply, is really stuck in the pain, in the shattering of their expectations of what the other person would be or could do, maybe even doubting, if humanity is savable because of what happened to them, and they're really distraught then what I would say is, yeah, what you're feeling is totally understandable. Yeah. Give yourself some kindness, okay? You feel very hurt. Yeah, you need understanding, you need support, you need love. Yeah. And so give yourself some kindness in all of this. See if you can give yourself some empathy for what you're going through. And also remember that the situation is not happening now. Yeah. So don't project it happening again in the future. Yeah. Just realize it's not happening now and focus on, see if you could have some compassion for the person who wounded you and give yourself some time, be kind to yourself, take walks, be gentle. That's what I would tell that person, okay? If it were one of the Sangha members sitting here, people who have said, I'm jumping in and, I want to overcome my internal negativities, and so do what you need to do to help me do that. To that person, I would say, are you sure the way you're interpreting the situation is correct? Did you have some expectations of that person that you were not aware of? Were you holding that person to some standard that you weren't conscious of and they didn't meet that standard? Can you accept that that person acted in a way different than you thought they could act or would act? Look at how you're interpreting the situation. Is there some exaggeration there? I might even tell them my story about trying to get the book published and that not working out, that story, which some of you have heard. I would maybe teach them the taking and giving meditation, or remind them to do purification practice with the visualization and mantra recitation. I would encourage them to accept the reality of the situation, and especially to see the pain and misery of the other person who harmed them. Okay? So I do it in a very different way. Depending who it is, I might even tease them a little bit until they let me know that, okay, that's enough. But, for practitioners, who really want to get to the bottom of these kind of things, then they're willing to put in the time and energy, and they're mentally capable of doing it, to really question these kinds of things. Because from a Buddhist view, all of our mental afflictions, the disturbing mental afflictions, clinging attachment, greed, laziness, jealousy, envy, belligerence, these kinds of things. They're all based on an exaggeration, interpreting the situation in an exaggerated way. Okay, so for a Buddhist practitioner, you question your emotions. Instead of just saying, I feel that, and making that emotion very real and concrete, we question. Yeah, why do I feel that? Yeah. Am I seeing this situation correctly? How else could I see this situation? Yeah. And then through that, we learn to apply the different antidotes that the Buddha taught to shift our mind and how we look at things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me give you an example. So I'm going to describe a situation that was very painful for me. It probably was not as painful for me as the situation this person is thinking of. I'm just saying that, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so this happened many years ago. So there was a student in the Dharma group who we worked together a lot, very diligent student, really offering service for the group, being very helpful, very kind to other people, really absorbing the teachings, yeah, and doing quite well. And I had no hint of anything not being up to par. Anyway, the group decided to have it was my birthday, so at the center we had some refreshments. So he didn't come, and instead he sent a card via somebody else that said, I cannot handle the teachings, I'm not coming to the group anymore. Totally out of the blue. So this is somebody I had put a lot of energy into and had a very good relationship with and cared about. And then completely unexpectedly, this happened. So I was really floored. I was very hurt. Yeah. I was very confused. I was puzzled. Did I do something wrong? What in the world is going on? I was just totally bamboozled and in a lot of pain about the whole thing because he wouldn't talk to me. Okay, and I had I just wanted some explanation, nothing. Okay, so then as, things happen, it was time for me to go and retreat after a couple of months. So I went into retreat. I was in retreat for about 3 months, 3.5, 4 months at that time. And during the retreat, of course, this was something that was quite painful for me, and I knew I had to work on it and get it resolved inside. And so I did that. And what I've realized, which I hadn't known before, even though once I realized it, it was blatant, like the nose on my face, was that I had unrealistic expectations for this person. Yeah. And I had no idea I had these expectations. The fact that they were unrealistic doesn't matter because most expectations are unrealistic, So I could say I had expectations of that person. I never checked with that person and said, these are my expectations for you. Yeah, do you agree to this? Yeah, we don't do that, do we? We just have our expectations and assume that the other person has agreed to behave and think and emote the way we think they should. Okay, but he wasn't doing that. And I had to sit there and say, you know, part of this is my responsibility, because I had these expectations, and the expectations, they performed a few functions. One is he sensed them. Even though they were unspoken, he sensed them, and he felt pressured by them. Yeah? Second was, you know, I was holding on to these expectations and then being upset because he didn't follow them. But the expectations were mine. I set up this whole framework of how things should be in my mind. And that was what I set up was incorrect. Yeah, I expected that person to be and do or whatever, something that they weren't. And I didn't allow for them to, you know, have questions and doubts and all sorts of other things, you know, because I wanted them to go in a certain direction. So I really had to see, okay, you know, I played some part in my own pain. It wasn't that he did this to me. It was a situation where my afflictions were at work and his afflictions were at work. And then the afflictions had a party and caused both of us misery. Yeah, but it wasn't his fault. And it wasn't my fault, because responsibility and fault are two different things. I had responsibility for pressuring him. I had responsibility for putting my own unrealistic expectations there. But that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And it doesn't mean I'm worthy of criticism and blame. And the fact that he acted in such a strange way, because other people agreed with me that his behavior was strange, you know, that doesn't mean he's a bad person. It doesn't mean he's at fault. You know, we don't need to blame somebody. It's not a situation of blame. Yeah, in fact, blame and fault, I think, are two words we should try and delete from the dictionary. But it was just how all these multiple causes and conditions played their way out. And then I said to myself, what do I have to learn from this situation? Number one, be aware of your expectations of other people, you know, and temper them. And realize, from this experience, I made a new slogan that said, sentient beings do what sentient beings do. In other words, sentient beings do not behave in the way I think they should. And sentient beings, you know, are not totally rational, and not everything they do makes sense, and not everything they do benefits themselves, let alone others. And so sentient beings, when they're confused, when they're in pain, they do all sorts of things. And I've got to include that possibility in how I relate to the world. So there may be some people that are fairly predictable and trustworthy, but don't expect them to always be that way, because they're sentient beings and they have mood swings and they have different things that happen in their life that are important, and they get interested in different things. And I mean, people are confused. So I've got to give them the space to be confused instead of expecting that they're always reasonable. Okay? So changing my attitude in that way has helped me so much. Yeah. If I hadn't changed my attitude, what is happening right now in this country, I would be going totally berserk. Yeah. But because I changed my attitude, it's like, well, this is samsara, isn't it? Yeah. One time I had something happen that was quite painful. Oh, that one was a really horrible thing. Anyway, and I was telling another friend about it. My other friend was a longtime Buddhist practitioner. And he said to me, "You're in samsara. What do you expect?" And it's like, well, truthfully, my self-centeredness expects everything to be reasonable and logical and favorable to me. And of course, that's totally ridiculous. What should I expect out of samsara? Yeah, that there's grief, lamentation, sadness, confusion, contradiction, self-sabotage. What do I expect out of samsara? This isn't a pure land. So if I have more reasonable expectations, then I can have more compassion for other living beings instead of my mind demanding that they be a certain way. Okay? So that's how I would answer this question if somebody were steeped in the Buddha Dharma and had that kind of life view. If they weren't, then I would have answered in the first way, because what they need is some understanding and support and compassion at that time. So we talked about what forgiveness is not. And we talked about what it is, just releasing the anger. Okay. And in order to forgive, we have to understand what anger and jealousy and hatred and hurt, pain, emotional pain. We have to understand what these things are. And this is where Buddhism is really, the Buddha's teachings are quite special that way. In the talk His Holiness gave last night online, he was talking about this, yeah? And if you really kind of immerse yourself in Buddhist psychology, it describes, how our mind works, and especially how these disturbing emotions arise, and, how they're rooted in just the very strong idea of me. I exist. So it's something that we feel automatically, innately. We never question it until we meet the Buddha's teachings. And then we begin to see that this very strong feeling of there's a real me is something that needs to be questioned and examined to see if it's true or not. Then we also look at the self-centered mind, the mind that says my happiness is more important than anybody else's. My suffering hurts more than anybody else's. Yeah. Now, in normal society, everybody would say, yes, of course. Everybody thinks that way. And if I don't, what's that famous saying? If I don't if I don't work for myself, who will work for me or who will be on my side? Anybody remember that? I can't remember. Yeah, or something. If I don't stand up for myself, who will stand up for me? It's something like that. I can't remember exactly how it goes. But that's what we feel, you know? That this thought that says, my happiness, my suffering are the most important things in the world. You know, that thought is an assumption that we've never, ever, ever questioned. Yeah. Now, we may have been taught being selfish is bad. And then what we do is we try and be a little bit less selfish. And we especially try hard at looking like we're not being selfish. Okay? So maybe the selfishness is still there, but we flex with it a bit. Yeah, so it doesn't look so bad. So we begin to look at that. And what are the effects of holding that? That I'm the most important one. My suffering hurts more. My happiness is the most important. What are the ramifications of that? So we start questioning that. And then we also start questioning, is that true? That my happiness is more important and my suffering hurts more. Is that true? And then you have a teacher like mine who says, well, there's over 7 billion human beings on this planet. They all want happiness. None of them want suffering. Why is your happiness and suffering more important than anybody else's? And the only reason I can give when my teacher asks that is because it's mine. What kind of answer is that? You know, that's the epitome of self-preoccupation, isn't it? And then you start reading Shantideva, yeah, because we come up, you know, but it's natural, you know, this body is mine and it is hurt. It does get hurt and I feel the hurt. And so then we always say, what's wrong with wanting myself to be happy? Well, first of all, Buddha never said anything's wrong with it. You know, we all want to be happy, of course. That's why we practice the Dharma, to be happy. We don't practice the Dharma so we can be miserable. Okay? So we're trying to actually look at, you know, what creates the cause for happiness and what creates the cause for misery. You know? And then Shantideva says, well, you're only concerned with this body out of habit because the body doesn't belong to you. Half of it came from your mom, half of it came from your, well, not even half. A little bit came from your mom, a little bit came from your dad, and all the rest came from the farmers who grew all the food that you've eaten. And if you ate meat, it comes from all the living beings who have given their lives to nourish your body. And you go, oh, but it's mine, I've got to take care. And Shantideva keeps hitting back on it, you know. Why? Not because he wants to make us suffering, but because he realizes that attachment to the self, attachment to our body, attachment to my rules of the universe, clinging to my welfare over anybody else's welfare is not the cause of happiness, it's the cause of misery. And Shantideva, great 8th century India sage, wants us to understand that. And so do our teachers, because they don't want us to experience pain. Okay, so we kind of have to sit and chew on that for a while. Yeah, why do I think my happiness is more important than everybody's? I mean, I believe in democracy. Yeah, and the majority, especially if it's a landslide majority, should win. And if we have a vote over who's the most important one in the universe, there's one party who has one vote, and the other party that has all the votes minus one. Now, which one am I? I'm the one who has the one vote, who thinks I'm more important than anybody else. But there's over 7 billion minus one who outvoted me, who are saying they are important, they matter, they have feelings. Yeah, if I believe in democracy, I have to pay attention to that. Yeah, I have to care about other living beings. The world is not all about me. That's one thing I have to deal with. Then this whole thing of how we exaggerate and misinterpret things, and how that exaggeration and misinterpretation leads us to feel hurt, to feel angry, to have all these other kinds of disturbing emotions. It's another thing to really look at and understand. And to really begin to get that it's not the outside situation, it's my internal interpretation of it, my internal emotional habit, pattern, response. That is the problem. The problem is not that people push my buttons. The problem is that I have buttons and that I display them so vividly with signs that say, do not push. But they're so evident to other people, and my buttons are so sensitive that even somebody just walks by, the movement of the air sets off the alarm. Somebody's attacking me. Somebody's treating me unfairly. Somebody's prejudiced against me. Somebody's ridiculing me. This is unfair. This is terrible. Okay, so the problem is that I have those buttons. Now, somebody's going to say, but aren't some of those buttons reasonable? I mean, to feel hurt when somebody betrays your trust, isn't that reasonable? Yeah, to feel angry when somebody is biased and prejudiced against you, isn't that reasonable? Okay, so for ordinary living beings, it's totally normal, totally reasonable that ordinary, confused, sentient beings would think like that. Is that way of thinking in line with reality? Is that way of thinking beneficial? That we have to look at. Yeah. Does my happiness come from inside? Does it come from outside? And I remember, because this question comes strong, but, my emotional reactions are completely normal. And even the scientists agree that if I feel threatened, this part of my brain is, it's the synapses are going nuts because, it's my reptilian brain and I felt threat. And when you feel threat, you want to fight or you want to flight. And so, what I'm experiencing right now, the rage and the anger and the fear, is, it's totally what I should be because I'm hardwired to feel that. And the scientists agree. Okay. And the Buddha would say, yes, that's their view. However, let's look at it another way and see if that is actually true. So I remember some years ago seeing some kind of documentary about Mother Teresa. And, it showed her in Calcutta and so on and so forth. It showed her praying. And it also showed her in Beirut when there was bombing going on in Beirut. I forget who was bombing Beirut at that time. It could have been Hezbollah, it could have been Israel. Somebody was bombing Beirut. And she was talking to somebody, some leader in the government, about making arrangements to get some refugees to a safe place. So she's in Beirut. You could hear the bombs in the interview. Somebody was taping this live, her live conversation with this official. You could hear the bombs in the background. And Mother Teresa's, she's some little old lady. I mean, she's little, she's old, People would look at her. If you walked by her in the street, you would say, oh, some little old lady, not worth much. But she was sitting there negotiating on the behalf of refugees to get them to a safe place. And I thought, wow, I really respect what she's doing. And I wish I had the courage to do that. And then how come she can sit there and not feel fear? And if I were in that situation, I would be terrified out of my booties. What is it? What is the difference why she can sit there with bombs flying around and not feel fear and be thinking only about those refugees? And then it really, I began to see what the Buddha has been saying, which is, it depends on how we interpret a situation. She did not interpret that situation as one to be fearful of. She clearly was not attached to her own body and her own safety. I'm sure she was aware of it. I don't think she was reckless. She tried to be safe. But in her mind, her priorities were not her own safety. It was the welfare of these other people. And so she didn't see the situation as terrifying because she wasn't holding on to the same thought that I would have been holding on to, which is my happiness is most important and I don't want to die no matter what. And it really hit me, it's not the external situation, it's how she's interpreting it. It's how she's thinking about it. And so clearly she had done a lot of what we call mind training. Okay? So it's a form of practice in the Buddhist tradition where we really train our mind in cherishing others. We train our mind to see suffering situations as beneficial. We transform them into the path. It's an incredible genre of teachings. Yeah. But clearly she had done some of that internal work. Okay. So if we want to forgive, doing that kind of internal work is part of, is part of doing it. really asking ourselves, how am I seeing the situations? What am I expecting? Do I have unfair expectations? Yeah. And is this situation really all negative? Is it really all bad? Okay, because again, the way our samsaric mind works is when we say something is bad, we are not going to change our mind. It is bad objectively from its own side. Yeah, and we think there's no other way to look at this situation. We are seeing reality. Yeah, when I'm mad at somebody, yeah, when you're mad at somebody, do you think that you're having a mistaken perception? No, whenever we're mad, we think we are seeing things correctly. I am 100% right. Yeah, because I am perceiving an objective situation that exists the way I'm perceiving it out there. And people who don't see it the same way, that's because something's wrong with their way of thinking. They don't think the right way. If they thought like me, then they would think the right way. Okay? So the thing is, when we're under the influence of a disturbing emotion, yeah, we think that the emotion is 100% solid, that there is no other way to see the situation. There is no other way to feel in the situation. Any reasonable, normal human being would see things the way we do and feel the way we do. And then the emotion feels so strong that we can't imagine not feeling this. It seems to us like we have no other choice in what to feel except what we happen to be feeling right now at that moment when we are so upset. Yeah, is it true or not true? Is this how your feelings appear to you? Yeah. So psychologists even have a phrase for it. They call it a refractory period, because at that time when the emotion's so strong, we can't take in any other information that may disagree with how we think and what we feel, because we're so sure in what we're thinking and feeling, and we reject any other information. Yeah, and that's why we get more upset when, somebody says, well, try looking at the situation this way. No, because our outlook is, how do we see the situation? I'm right. The other person is wrong. And the way to reconcile is they change. Isn't it? I'm right. You're wrong. You change. And then everything's fine. I have no responsibility in this, because my emotions are completely rational and objective, and everybody who's sane would feel the same way. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that we have to start questioning. Yeah? Because how we experience a situation depends on how we interpret it. As we can see in the difference between the way Mother Teresa would feel sitting in Lebanon when there's bombing and the way I would feel. Okay, not the external situation, it's the mind. Okay, so the whole idea about forgiving is that we have to change our outlook on things, because we're never We want to change the other person. We want them to regret what they did that hurt us. We want them to apologize. Can we make them do any of that? No, we can't make anybody do anything. So the more that we say it's in their ballpark, the more we're making ourselves miserable. The only mind we can ever control is our own. Yeah? And so to begin to look at our assumptions, our habitual emotions, question them, learn the Buddhist teachings, how else we can see things. Yeah? And then this will give us an avenue so that we can release the anger and forgive the other person. So it's not about stuffing the anger down. It's not about whitewashing a situation and pretending, well, it's all okay. My husband beat me last night, but I forgive him. It's okay. No, it's about really looking deeply and seeing, seeing clearly what is going on and what is realistic, what is beneficial, and accustoming our mind to that. Okay, so if we go over time a couple of minutes, we can do a few questions. Otherwise, we're at our time right now.
So one of the things I've been hanging on from is this clique situation from 5th grade. And I realize that it's quite unrealistic to expect children to, have wisdom and to have fully developed compassion. And yeah, so I kind of go back to that a lot, saying these are just children. What do I expect?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's helpful.
Yeah, it's helpful, isn't it? They're not adults. Yeah. Sometimes the adults are like children, except they mask it better.
Regarding the question that came in about emotional pain and abuse, I remember I listened once to an interview by an abbot in India, and he got asked by a couple of psychologists coming from Oregon, I think, many years ago, and they asked him how they deal with these Tibetans who were coming back from Tibet, having experienced traumatic experiences. And they could help, they have certain trauma therapies and such. And he said, we have certain techniques, and that is, for example, as you mentioned, Tonglen compassion practice, kindness, and also karma. And then when they come back, what they give them is lots of space, listening, and then encouraging them to practice these methods. And so the abbot said, we give them about a year, and then you can come back and see. And if that doesn't work, then maybe we can see if you can help. So, but then they came back, and they saw these monks totally transformed.
Yeah. I was at one of the Mind and Life conferences where this thing came up about PTSD, and His Holiness was saying very few Tibetans have that. Yeah, and the scientists who were there were just shocked because some of them, especially the women, were really violently treated in the communist prisons. Yeah. And they they managed. And it's because of the way the religious training, the way they're taught to think, then it doesn't go into PTSD that way.
I I think since we don't have this kind of background and the culture we grew not up with, I think it's very important to be patient with oneself and really go step by step and look both approaches, like the Western approach, and use the approaches in Buddhist psychology. I think very slowly and being very patient with oneself.